In the last episode of Developer Diaries, we talked about different types of ammunition and how they interact with the armor in our game. Today we will look at how different armor types and protection systems work in armored warfare.
Armor in armored warfare is all about protecting your vehicle and taking as little damage as possible from the threats that are out there. One of the things we wanted to represent is that armor has gotten very advanced over the time that armored vehicles have been in use. So while it originally started out as just thick steel plates, it has since evolved into many different types of technology, including multiple layers of armor, often referred to as composite armor, different types of compositions of the material itself to give greater defense against ever-evolving types of ammunition. There's also different layers of armor now, like they discovered that adding these additional layers really help diffuse the penetration of the shells coming its way. So armor is all about the defense of the vehicle and protecting the crew and technology inside that vehicle to keep it operational in the map. Generally, armor is all about deflecting the shots. It's a situation where if the shot gets through the armor, then it's not going to typically be able to reduce the damage that shot does to it, that projectile can do to it. But if it is able to deflect that projectile, then it'll keep the vehicle from taking any damage at all, keeping the crew inside safe, keeping the engine safe. So it's really sort of an all or nothing situation in most cases with armor.
So in armored warfare, only hits to the main body of the vehicle, which is the hull and the turret, will actually cause a reduction in the vehicle's hit points. So very thick armor can either deflect shells entirely, or in the case of explosions, can reduce or almost completely mitigate the damage that you would take as a result of that hit. So in addition to that, the angle of the armor plays a major role in how effectively thick it's going to be against any certain type of projectile. So what that means is that a player who understands the particular configuration of their vehicle can use that armor and angle it appropriately to be able to stop damage or deflect it entirely. Effective armor thickness means the combination of the armor, the thickness of the armor, the nominal thickness, meaning the distance from point to point, the armor composition, so what the armor is made of, and how the armor is angled. So once the armor is angled past a certain slope, the idea is that the line of sight distance from point to point will increase. And so the effective thickness is the combination of all of those.
One of the interesting things about modern armor is it has evolved to a point where it has very different effects depending on the types of ammunition that's fired against it. And we wanted to represent that in the game. So we have implemented a system where the designers are able to identify what the different materials are in the composition of the vehicle's armor itself, and then they can assign different coefficients to how effective that armor is against the different types of ammunition.
So the armor composition values are used to simulate the different compositions of armor, of modern vehicle armor. There's a lot of different varieties of modern armor. There's things like composite armors, there's aluminum and different kinds of steel. So the idea with these multipliers was to allow us to more accurately simulate the way that specific ammunition will interact with specific types of armor. So, for example, certain types of composite armor are going to be more effective at reducing the penetration of a shape charge than they will a kinetic penetrator. So by having these multipliers, it allows us to more accurately model the strengths and weaknesses of specific vehicles that have very specific types of armor.
So spaced armor is all about adding layers to armor. Depending on the different types of ammunition being fired at, a spaced armor can have different levels of effectiveness. But even against any types of ammo, it's going to have at least some type of impact. The idea is that the more layers you have a shell that has to get through, the less likely it's going to be able to penetrate them all. So there's a few different types of protection that players will be able to add to the vehicles as they upgrade them over time. For example, players can add cage armor to many of their vehicles. Cage armor is very effective at mitigating the chance of high explosive shells of getting through, and also shape charges. Cage armor is able to interfere with the fuse or the detonator on those types of projectiles, and has a pretty good chance to actually make them ineffective completely when they hit.
So applique armor is actually the simplest of all the armor types that are available as upgrade packages on the vehicles. Applique just simply adds some additional thickness to the existing armor, although it does have one additional benefit, which is that it does cause a second penetration check. So in our hit resolution formula, there's a check each time penetrator or the stream from a shape charge hits a different layer of armor. And so by having two layers of armor, you're doing two penetration checks. And so even though the sum of armor thickness from both the spaced armor or the applique armor and the base armor may be a certain thickness, having to do two checks may actually make it fail, whereas it would have succeeded if it was just a single check. That's one small advantage of it. And that's sort of to simulate what happens in real life with this kind of applique armor. where it'll sometimes deform or destroy a projectile when it hits the second layer of armor. So explosive reactive armor still adds the same kind of benefit of a little bit of additional thickness to the armor, just like spaced armor or applique armor does, but it's specifically made to defeat shape charges. So the way that we're treating that is that any shape charge which hits ERA armor will have a pretty high chance to just be completely destroyed by the ERA. In some cases, such as older ERA and newer modern ammunition, there is still a chance that it's going to make it through. But even then, there's then the base armor thickness that still has to be penetrated after hitting the ERA. In addition to that, ERA is detonated each time that it's hit. So once the ERA in a vehicle is hit once during a match, it will no longer provide protection on that part of the vehicle. So another shape charge that hits the same location won't get any of the benefits that were provided in the previous hit. Smoke grenades in Armored Warfare will provide instantaneous cover to anybody who's able to shoot them off in time before they get hit by an enemy. The idea is that they're directional, so if there's a player in front of you and you pop those smoke grenades off, you're going to actually be able to completely disappear from them immediately, and you'll be gone, they can't see you, and you can maneuver, do whatever you need to do to get to cover. They last about 10 seconds, that's still something that we're kind of working with. Now, if there's somebody who's off to the side of you and can still see you, even though the smoke grenades are firing off in front, then they're not actually going to do much for you. So they are situational, but they'll be extremely useful in getting out of bad situations.
So a hard kill active protection system is something that will fire at an incoming anti-tank guided missile and just shoot it out of the sky so that it never hits you. A soft kill system, which we don't actually have implemented at this time, but we are planning to implement in the future, uses electrical countermeasures to interfere with a guidance system of an anti-tank guided missile to throw it off course or prevent somebody from being able to target it properly.
The difference between active and passive protection system is the active ones actually fire into the incoming projectile and detonate it early before it gets to the tank. The passive ones interfere with the guidance of an incoming missile so that it's less likely to hit.
So Armored Warfare focuses on a lot of the modern vehicles, modern ammunition, modern armor. And I think that one of the things that makes this game really interesting is that we've gone to lengths to try to get all of these new mechanics into the game in interesting and unique ways. So a lot of this stuff really changes the kind of core gameplay. Things like explosive reactive armor and smoke grenades, they add a dynamic element that makes it much more interesting for players when they're actually in combat trying to figure out how to utilize these different elements. And so I think that along with just the awesome modern vehicles, I mean things like the M1A1 and the T90 are great examples of some of our top tier vehicles that are really awesome and unique vehicles to play.
We hope that this two-part video make the basics of penetration and defense clear to you, and we will be looking forward to seeing you on the battlefields of Armored Warfare.